All right, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Mindy Gosselin and I'm the Envirothon Program Coordinator. You may recognize me from all of the emails that I send out. So thank you for coming to our current issue webinar. I have a quick announcement that you guys have not heard of yet. So we will be having a winter goose chase scavenger hunt. So that information will be coming in the next week or so. We're really excited. We've taken some feedback from the fall scavenger hunt. So we are very excited to get that put together for you all. And so this year, the national topic is waste to resources. And our station leader, Sherill Baldwin from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, is our station leader. She has been releasing materials every month in relation to this topic. It's posted on our website. And this current issue webinar is going to be in relation to those releases. And then soon we will be releasing the actual scenario for your oral presentation at the end of the month, beginning of next month. Awesome. So now I will hand it over to Sherill for her presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. So I've never participated in the Connecticut Envirothon, so I'm really happy to be part of this. Also very happy that the topic has to do with waste to resources, because of course, it's my favorite topic. So I do have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully this will be interesting to you. So I'm providing an overview on sustainable materials management. We often joke about it being called waste or trash, but really to be able to understand and recognize the value of that material, we really need to call it material and not waste, because waste is things that doesn't have any value. And of course, a lot of our resources, glass, bottles, cans, even mattresses, have value. And so we call them materials, and we try to manage those materials sustainably. So we actually have a solid waste hierarchy in which we manage, and you may be familiar with this, right? You might be familiar with the 3 R's, or reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, the top one, the biggest priority, is really to prevent waste. And that is always the top of the hierarchy because it is the priority. We need to prevent waste before it's even created. And then we reuse, recycle, we recover maybe for composting or energy. And then finally, we dispose last. This is what we want to have the least. We want to dispose of materials the least amount as possible, because we want to reduce our reliance on waste to energy, incinerators, landfills, etc. So you may not be aware, but in Connecticut, we're actually in the process of undergoing a waste crisis. Oh, and I think I spelled crisis wrong. That looks pretty bad, doesn't it? I wonder if anybody else caught that. So we're experiencing a waste crisis right now, and it has to do with the fact that MIRA, Materials Innovation Recovery Authority, is one of our incinerators in Hartford, and they're going to be closing this summer. They burn about 1/3 of the waste in Connecticut, and as a result, if they cannot burn it in state, it means that it's going to be hauled out of state, and probably to landfills out of state. And it's going to increase our costs dramatically. Knowing this 2 years ago, in August of 2020, the Department of Energy, Environmental Protection, and a number of municipal officials banded together and formed the Connecticut Coalition for Sustainable Materials Management, sometimes referred to as CCSM, which is a long acronym, or sometimes just referred to as the Coalition. So the priorities that the Coalition created as a result of forming working groups, they formed work groups to really look at recycling, organics. Organics is a term that represents food scraps and leaf and yard waste, and sometimes paper that can be composted, and also something called EPR, or Extended Producer Responsibility, as well as something called unit-based pricing or pay-as-you-throw. So the priorities were to reduce the amount of waste, expand reuse opportunities, increase food scrap recycling, improve recycling programs, especially reducing contamination, reducing costs to our towns, implementing new approaches, pay-as-you-throw and EPR. So pay-as-you-throw is also known as unit-based pricing, and what it does is it treats our trash like a utility. Those of you that live in a home that maybe your family owns, you will have to pay for water. If you're a tenant, it's usually part of your rent. It's a deal. You could use as much water as you want and the price is the same. But when you own your home, you actually have to pay for the amount of water that you use. And it's a utility that can be quite pricey. Similarly, when you rent, or perhaps when you own your home as well, you have to pay for your heating bill. Well, can you imagine going through a cold spell like we did a couple of weeks ago and having to pay for your neighbor's heating bill? Crazy. Well, currently the way we do trash is we do just that. We pay through it through our taxes, and as a result, there's no incentive to conserve. So everybody can throw away as much as they want, or they can recycle as much as they want, but everybody's paying the same amount. And so a pay-as-you-throw system tries to create an equitable system and provide incentives to help people reduce, reuse, recycle more. EPR, which I want you to learn more about, hint, hint, because it's connected to the scenario, is also known as extended producer responsibility. It's a mandatory type of product stewardship. It's mandatory in that a program is created as a result of a law. A law must be passed, and then a program happens. The program is usually coordinated or run by producers and manufacturers, because the EPR is a program that requires manufacturers or producers to take responsibility for the end of life of a product. Perhaps you're familiar with the paint program or the electronics recycling program in Connecticut, where for paint, you can bring your used paint back to a retail store, and then it'll be collected and recycled, and there's no cost to municipalities, and that's because it's an EPR program. So EPR programs require producer and manufacturers of products to take responsibility. It shifts the financial and management responsibility. It shifts having to pay for something and to manage and coordinating it away from municipalities and or residents, so that so it's being paid for by the manufacturers. And usually what it does is it creates an incentive for manufacturers to reconsider how they design their products and or the packaging for their products. It's pretty cool. The coalition also created a menu of options. This is a very busy slide, but I just want you to know that they created a huge range of ideas, and they decided to call it a menu because each town may pick 5, 4, 8, but they may not be picking the same ones. But we're all trying to figure out how can we reduce our waste, recycle more, and basically create less reliance on having to send our trash out of state. So I thought this was a fun graph, so I thought I'd include it. When all the working groups were meeting, the municipalities involved in the coalition were surveyed, and most of them wanted to start focusing on food scraps and organics recycling, which is pretty cool. And then a lot of them also wanted to focus on EPR, focus on trying to reduce contamination and recycle more, anaerobic digestion, which is a form of composting organics, but it's doing it anaerobically instead of aerobically. SMART is another name for unit-based pricing, et cetera, et cetera. So all of the municipalities in Connecticut know that these things are possible, they're opportunities, and they're priorities that we need to move forward on. Implementing them, I just have some highlights. I don't know what towns everybody is from, so maybe some of these are your towns. Town of Meriden is currently piloting a co-collection program, first of its kind, where they have a cart for their materials, and they have a bag for food scraps and a bag for waste. And they put both bags in their cart. So they have a green bag for food scraps and an orange bag for trash, and they put it in the same cart, and they're collected together. And then when they get to the facility, the bags are separated by color. And then the food scraps will be composted or sent to for quantum biopower for anaerobic digestion. And then the trash will also be sent to the incinerator. West Haven is piloting a food scraps composting program, very different. Anaerobic digestion, it's in its name, digests or breaks down the materials anaerobically or without air. But West Haven is doing something called a passive aeration composting, where they're doing leaves and food scraps, and they are putting it in a pile, and to create oxygen, they aren't turning it like you might do in a home composting system. They're laying down PVC pipe, connecting it to a battery with a blower and a solar panel so that it will constantly recharge, and it blows air through the system and blowing it through the pile. That's where the term passive comes from. Very exciting pilot. Fairfield is collecting their glass separately from other recyclables because sometimes there are challenges with glass in our single stream. Town of Wilton, they're implementing zero waste initiatives in all their schools with reusable trays, food scrap collection, and sharing tables. Very exciting. We have a new initiative coming soon called Reduce Waste CT, and then we are looking at EPR for packaging and gas cylinders. So while I am going to be focusing mostly on recycling, it's important to remember that we need to prevent waste from before it's generated. And so recycling is actually the least priority when we're looking at the R's associated with managing waste or our materials. So I'm just going to go through some quick ideas of what you may already be doing, or maybe it gives you some ideas of how you might reduce waste. In terms of personal changes or purchasing, it's very easy to buy things online these days. And sometimes we purchase things without really thinking. So we might want to take a pause and say, do we really need that item? Maybe we could buy it locally. Or could we buy it used? Maybe we already have one and it could be repaired. Or maybe we only need it for like 1 or 2 times and we could borrow it from our neighbor. Or maybe even our library has one. Some things associated with food. Now I know that you're probably not in charge of shopping, but in terms of your household, it's best if a household creates a list before shopping, because it's so easy to buy things that look good at the moment, and then you may not end up doing anything with them, and then they end up going to waste. Create a menu for a few days or a week before you even go to the store. That way you're only buying the things that you need and you know how you're going to use them. Freeze items before they go bad. If you're not a big leftover eater, you could freeze them and then have them again later. They do say rotate the food in your fridge. Mark what date, what is in there, and what is the date of when you're putting it in the fridge or freezer. It's a little overboard for me, but I include the photo because it inspires some folks. I certainly don't go that level of detail. If you are going to have food that you can't use and it has gone bad, learn to compost. And then there's also this thing called the Clean Plate Club, of course, where you eat everything on your plate. And instead of maybe overeating or over putting things on your plate, consider using a small plate. And that way you don't have excess on your plate at the end of your meal. Some other thoughts: reuse. You could buy durable goods that can be repaired. Donate unused items that you no longer want. And if you are going to make donations, donate responsibly, in the sense that some nonprofits want a little bit of everything, but some charities just want clothing. Some charities are looking just for medical supplies, so musical instruments would not be helpful to them. So we need to think about donating responsibly. Think about repairing the items you have, or maybe organize community events, tag sales, free days, maybe start a swap shop, coordinate a repair clinic. Those are getting a lot of traction these days, or make a mini library. And expand library offerings, tools, cookware, or art. I can get tins, baking tins at my library, which is pretty cool. So to take a step back and really think about recycling and helping us understand what is recycling, if we start in the top right-hand corner where we see a man moving a cart, that's the collection process. We see ourselves as connected to that because we put all of our recyclables in our bin and maybe our cart or maybe our little blue bin, and we either bring it to the transfer station or it's collected curbside, and maybe you also collect at the school, and then those materials are taken away and you're like, ha, I've recycled. Well, it's an important step as it is the first step, but there's so many more steps and that need to go through the process in order to ensure that materials are recycled. So collection is the first step. All of those materials then need to be sorted and processed. And those materials need to be sorted in the sense that all the cardboard goes together, all the milk jugs go together, all the aluminum cans go together, the tin cans go together, and then they are baled to specification. And what that means is the MRFs, or the materials recovery facilities that do the processing of our materials, need to ensure that they meet a specification. A bale is usually, sometimes it's a square 3 by 3 by 3 or cube 3 by 3 by 3 feet. Sometimes it's 2 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. The specifications are dependent on who is buying your product, because these are commodities. And they bale them up, they put wire around them, and you can see a picture here, and these are stacked bales. It looks like stacked bales of plastic. And these bales need to meet a specification in order to be able to be sold. They're sold to an end market. Sometimes they're sold to a manufacturer that completely makes the new product. Like if you sell cardboard, they may make cereal boxes and it's immediately made into a new product. Plastics often have 2 steps. In this case, the end market is buys the product and makes little beads and then sells those beads to a bottler so that they can make a milk jug or maybe a water jug. And then in turn, it gets filled with the product, in this case, milk, and then we buy it. When all those steps take place and we purchase that product again, that's when it's been recycled. So what does our recyclables look like? In 2015, we did a waste characterization. And in addition to that, we did a characterization of our single stream or mixed recycling system. And what we found is that over 50% is paper. We have a lot of contaminants, sadly. 18.2% of what comes in the door at a MRF facility is something they do not want. Small amount of steel and aluminum, a good percentage of glass, plastic really small. I say plastic really small because we often think of plastic as being a problem with recycling, but plastic isn't really so much a problem with recycling as it's more of a problem with litter, and it's a problem with contamination. In the sense that if we were going to see what contamination looked like, you would probably find that a lot of that is plastic items that they do not want and they cannot market, and it's not considered a commodity, it's considered trash. Oh, sorry, somebody's trying to get in. So when we think about our current system, usually we think of it in terms of trash and recyclables, but if you haven't been aware, there's a lot more communities collecting food scraps. Sometimes they're collecting food scraps at the transfer station. We have communities collecting food scraps at curbside. And then of course, Meriden is doing that new project, which is pretty exciting. And so there's lots of opportunities in addition to composting in your backyard. And so when we look at the modern system, we are really looking at recycling, food scraps, and trash. But it's much more complex than that. Curbside, I may have access to recycling and I may have access to trash, but all these other things are collected for recycling or reuse, but those are not necessarily on my curb. They may be perhaps at your transfer station. And so we also have to understand the complexity of the system and how we manage all these materials. So if we start on the left, we have trash, we have mixed recyclables, we have brush, leaf and yard waste. Those are sometimes collected curbside in a community, sometimes at the transfer station. Sometimes you have to drive it down yourself. Textiles is the same as clothing. You've got linens and other materials. Electronics are collected. My town has an electronics collection at the transfer station. Yours might as well. Or maybe your town does a couple events a year collecting electronics. We also can do plastic film where sometimes at the transfer station, often it's at a retail store. So we have to think about the options are also in different locations. Food scraps might be curbside, might be at the transfer station, or maybe in my backyard if I do home composting. And then bulky waste. Sometimes there are special days for bulky waste where you have to bring it, or sometimes special days where you put it on your curb. And then there's paint. Paint is also something that is recycled and you bring it back to a retailer. And then I just throw in Oscar because I'm a fan. I like Oscar the Grouch. So a question that I get a lot as we're looking at the recycling system and whether it's working is, are we doing it wrong? And a lot of folks are concerned. Do I put this in there? Do I not put this in there? Am I doing it the right way? And there's a reason for that. It's because our system has become very complex. This is a very busy slide, so you don't have to necessarily look at the details. But what I do want you to see is that the lines go from very low to very high. And what they're telling us is that there's an increase in the number of products. The number of products and packaged goods that are created and put on our retail shelves every year. And that number is, at least in 2016, it was going up to 20,000 new products a year. I'm just gonna let that sink in. 20,000 new products in packaging on our retail shelves every year. So if we have 20,000 new products coming into our retail shelves, and you're trying to figure out whether or not it could go in your recycling bin, and you're like, I don't know. And you ask me, and you're like, I have this thing, can I do it? I'm like, I don't know. You have to send me a picture. I don't even know what the product is. And this is the disconnection there is. Manufacturers of products and packaging companies of products don't have conversations with recycling programs. They don't have conversations with MRF operators. And there's a huge disconnect about making new products and whether or not those products can be collected and recovered for those materials and that value. And recycling arrows add to the confusion. Kooky. We may have started using them in the 90s. That's our fault. Originally, they were created as plastic resin codes to help us identify what type of plastic it was. That was helpful. But it was also at a time in which plastics were just beginning to be used for packaging for products. Now it just adds confusion. Nobody knows what anything is. And the reason I'm bringing this up too is that I'm asking you not to use those arrows. Those arrows do not identify if a product is acceptable in the Connecticut Mixed Recycling Program. These arrows don't tell you if they're acceptable in California's program, or Iowa's recycling program, or Florida's recycling program. They don't tell you if they're in or if they're out. All they do is identify what type of plastic resin it is. So if you really want to know what's in or out, you need to use the RecycleCT Wizard app or search tool. So I'm not going to ask you to put on your video at this point, but if somebody could respond in the chat function, it might be kind of fun to hear what people think. So if you are not aware, recycling is mandatory in Connecticut. And Connecticut was an early adopter of a number of different initiatives, including recycling. So that was a hint. So my question to you is, when did Connecticut pass legislation to mandate recycling? Was it in 1975? Was it in 1989? Or was it in 2012? Okay, responses are coming in. I'm going to give it another second. Thank you for being so engaged. All right, we have, let's see, one person said C, which is 2012. And then we have a number of folks that said 1989 and a few folks that said 1975. So the correct answer is 1989, when the first legislation was passed, but it's sort of a trick question because more legislation was passed in 2012, adding to the list of what is designated to be recycled. So most of you are right. Thank you. So what's mandatory? Oh, I know, very orange. A lot of things are mandatory. We've got glass and metal food beverage containers, plastic containers, scrap metal, NiCad rechargeable batteries, waste oil, leaves, corrugated cardboard, etc. So all of these materials should not be going into your trash can. They should be they are required to be recovered and collected in some fashion. Some of them may be because they're hazardous, like waste oil or batteries. Now, if you don't generate these items, you don't have to recycle them because you're not generating them. So it's, of course, mandatory if you create them that you need to recover them. And if we look at the top part of the list, everything above the line is what is part of the mixed recycling system. It's only about glass and metal food and beverage containers. And it's about plastic containers. And while those include the resin numbers, thank you very much, Connecticut statutes, just to add to our confusion, it is about containers. We talk about jugs, tubs, jars, bottles, and berry baskets or clamshells. Those are plastic containers that are acceptable, with exceptions of being black plastic or expanded polystyrene, which you may know as styrofoam. So it's really about containers. And then on the other side, it's all of our paper, which we often refer to as our fiber, that makes new paper products. Other programs that manage our materials in Connecticut includes the bottle bill. The bottle bill was passed in '78 and started in 1980 in Connecticut. The primary purpose was really about litter. It was not really designated to be a recycling program. It was really designed to take litter off of our roadways. And then 2009, it was expanded. And again, in 2021, last year, it was really significantly modified. So I'm going to share some of those modifications with you. So in 1980, when the bottle bill was implemented, it was really focusing on carbonated beverages such as beer, soft drinks, and carbonated water. It had a 5-cent deposit. In 2009, they added water bottles, still 5-cent deposit. And then in 2021, it added tons of things. But notice at the end of that bullet is when it's effective. It doesn't actually go into practice until January 1st, 2023. But at that time, it will add hard seltzer, hard cider, plant water. I don't know what that is, maybe you do. Juice drink, tea, coffee, kombucha, plant-infused drink, sports drink, or an energy drink. So it's going to include probably a lot of plastic and some, probably some glass in the future of non-carbonated beverages. It also increased the deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents. The intention, of course, is that if it's a higher deposit, it'll be an incentive to not litter it and try to get your dime back. But again, notice at the end, it's not into effect until January 1st, 2024. And then something just to add some really interesting confusion to the change in the bottle bill. They didn't add it to the bottle bill, but it was added in the bottle bill language that a 5-cent surcharge will be applied to the sale of miniatures or mini liquor bottles, these little things here, containing spirits or liquor, and that started October 1st, 2021. So what that means is people who buy the miniature liquor bottles will get charged 5 cents, and then twice a year, the wholesale distributors of these containers will then pay out that 5 cents to the municipalities where they were purchased, and want that money to go towards programs related to recycling and anti-litter. How that will work, we have yet to know. It's not a department program. It's a program that's being run by the liquor distributors. So we'll see what happens. But that is how the bottle bill has changed. Other programs in Connecticut include EPR programs, or Extended Producer Responsibility. We currently have 4 programs in Connecticut. One is for electronics, that's managed by the department because of the toxicity and hazardness associated with electronics. Paint is managed by a nonprofit called Paint Care. Mattresses is managed by the Mattress Recycling Council. And thermostats is managed by the Thermostat Recycling Company. Because usually what happens is after a law is passed, it requires a nonprofit organization that represents the industry groups to form, and that organization will get fees and funds from the industry and then manage and run the program that collects it. So Paint Care, for instance, they have a very active program that collects paint in all of our retail stores, and they do a lot of education and outreach in the state. Mattresses, we actually have 2 facilities that recycle mattresses in Connecticut, and this is one that's in Bridgeport, where they actually fillet the mattresses and cut out all the different components, and then they bale them up, meeting specifications of their own, a little bit different than bottles and cans because it's like cotton, polyfoam, coconut fiber, and metal and wood. It's very fascinating. And so we have a lot of different types of recycling in Connecticut. Other programs, just sort of a summary. We mentioned electronics, paint, mattresses, and thermostats, but we also have household hazardous waste programs. A lot of towns have textile recycling programs, food scraps. A lot of communities collect books and have book swaps. The Lions, of course, usually collect eyeglasses, and sometimes those collection programs are at the transfer station or the town library. We also have a lot of programs that have swap shops at town transfer stations where they collect household items to be reused. And then sometimes we have bulky waste collection or just rigid plastics, it's called, and they collect everything from playscapes, 5-gallon buckets, broken lawn chairs, etc. We have plastic bag and plastic wrap programs that bring back to retail. And then shredded paper is often collected in one-day events at a transfer station. And either people bring in their pre-shredded paper, or they might bring in their paper to be shredded, and then all together that paper can be recycled, but it's not part of the mixed recycling bin. It's not part of our single stream program. In terms of recycling education, we have a lot of different educational programs, and for recycling, we have the What's In, What's Out program, coordinated in partnership with RecycleCT. It promotes of what goes in the bin and what doesn't go in the bin. They help promote a universal list of materials that we created in partnership with the MRFs. And then they have the RecycleCT Wizard search tool online, as well as an app. So we have a universal list in Connecticut, if you're not aware. If your town Hopefully your town has been up to date and they're aware that there's a universal list. It used to be where one town would say yes to pizza boxes, another town would say no to pizza boxes, a third town would be like, I can only do the top of my pizza box, etc. A lot of confusion. So what we did in 2016 is we met with all the different material recovery facilities that process our residential mixed recyclables and asked them key questions to help us understand what materials can they process and they want versus what are the things they can't process and they can't handle in their MRF system. So we posed the question by saying, what is detrimental to your system? What item, material, or product does the following? So for example, we would hold up an item and say, is this harmful to your employees or safety concern for your staff? Or is this product going to cause harm to your equipment and shut your machinery down? Or is this product reducing the value of your other commodities and making it difficult to sell your commodities? And that is how we came up with one universal list. And what we found is that the number one contaminant that they did not want was bags. And so again, if we look at that 18.2%, half of that is bags, either single bags or bagged recyclables or bagged trash would come in through the system. And so if we could just reduce the number of bags that we send through the system, that would reduce our contamination levels in half. So if you're not familiar with a MRF has manual operations and then mechanical. And so all the recyclables are put on a floor of a huge facility, and then they get set up into a conveyor belt, and the first line of defense are people. They're our friends, neighbors, and our colleagues, and they hand sort, and they pick out what is contamination, and they pull it out. It then goes through a series of conveyor belts where things are blown off, things are pulled off with a magnet, going through optical sorters, going through rotors that are able to identify certain materials, and those materials are then separated. So when a bag of materials comes in on the line, can you tell the difference between which is the bag of recyclables and which is the bag of trash? Of course, this is also another trick question because they're the same photo. And that's my point. When a facility is running at a really high speed and people are picking things off, they don't have time to open the bag and say, oh, this is a bag of diapers, yuck. Or, oh, wow, somebody really took care in cleaning those materials. Those are clean recyclables. They don't have time. So it all gets put in the trash. It all goes down the chute that is trash. So we can't bag our materials. Top 5 contaminants from the study: plastic bags, shredded paper, bagged recyclables or bagged waste, tanglers, things that tangle in the system, like garden hoses or hangers, clothing, and bottle caps. These are the top 5 contaminants. These are the things we need to stop putting into our recycling bin. Did I mention not to put any more bags in your recycling bin? Just want to make sure everybody heard that. And this is why. So take a close look at this. This is a series of rotors going up from the center of the screen up to the right. These are rotors that are very sharp and they kind of move back and forth. And what happens is all the materials will then move up. It's like a rotating conveyor in some ways. But what happens is, if you can see, these are all tangled with plastic bags. So now take another look and you see this yellow shirt. That's a man. That's a man that had to jump into the equipment to manually cut off all those bags. So I was visiting the facility And this guy had to jump in during one of the, I think it was during lunch hour, and he had to jump in and just cut. And what they end up doing is they shut down the equipment 3 times a day, and 1 or 2 guys will jump in the machinery and manually cut and try to clear the machinery of all these plastic bags. This is how much of a problem it is. If you know anything about manufacturing in business, you don't want to shut your business down or shut down your manufacturing process because of contaminants like this. It costs money. And then who's going to pay for that? We are. Our municipalities are. And as we're trying to deal with budgets, this is an area that we could improve by just stop putting bags in our trash and our recyclables. So this pile is all the materials that this guy cut off. I was standing there for 15 minutes watching and taking pictures. That's a lot. That's a lot of crap. We can do so much better. And we have to do better, because the reason we need to do better is because we are at the front end of the process. We're the ones that collect the materials. We want them to be sorted. They'll be sorted faster and easier and more cost effective if we give them clean material so they can meet the specification, sell it to an end market to ensure that it's made into a new product, and thus we can ensure that the material is recycled. So all pizza boxes are in. Just no food and no liners. I don't care how much grease it is. And if somebody tells you you can't do it, I want you to have them call me because they're wrong. Especially right now, cardboard prices are skyrocketing. Fiber is worth a lot right now, and our guys want your pizza boxes. A lot of things are out. You may have thought that they used to be in, but they are out. And actually, they've never been in. I think for a while, our facilities were willing just to sort of turn a blind eye, but we can't turn a blind eye anymore. We really need to focus on improving what goes in our recycling bin to try to make our system more efficient. So no loose bottle caps, no coffee pods, no shredded paper, no plastic bags, no styrofoam, and no black plastic. And some things are just trash. Single-use coffee cups, single straws, moldy or mildewy textiles, pens and pencils and toothbrushes, broken garden hoses, popped balloons, styrofoam. Just put it in the trash. And this is glass. Believe it or not, this is what glass looks like at a MRF. It's a mess. There's so many things in that glass. Prescription bottles, toothbrushes, lip balm, tampon applicators, pens, batteries, bottle caps. Pretty disgusting. So when we think again about plastic, it's not about plastic is all in, and it's not about if it's got an arrow it's in. It's whether or not it's a container. Plastic containers are in. Other things to keep out of your bin: no batteries, no syringes, no propane tanks. Believe it or not, sometimes I find lawnmowers, and no dirty stuff. Again, it's our friends, neighbors, and colleagues that are sorting through our stuff. They don't need to see our adult diapers or tampons or baby diapers, etc. So this is the RecycleCT webpage, and in this top corner here is where the RecycleCT Wizard is, and this is the search tool. And the really cool thing about the Wizard is that RecycleCT bought the rights to it, and as a result, they can give this widget to any other municipality that wants it. Not only that, facilities, MRF operators, haulers, nonprofit organizations, faith communities are also asking to post it on their webpage. And they are, which is fantastic because all the information is the same, and it helps push forward the fact that we have one universal list. And then of course, we also have it on an app, which is very helpful. We also have materials that can be downloaded and printed. And if nothing else, I encourage you to reflect on that some things are recyclable, but whether or not they're acceptable in the mixed recycling or single stream program is something else. So consider the fact that my t-shirt might be recyclable in that I could donate it to Goodwill, but that doesn't mean it's recyclable in my curbside container. And that's the same for a lot of materials. So we need to figure out, where is it acceptable, and is it acceptable in my curbside bin or at the transfer station?